Story Narae, the art of storytelling.
Hello everyone, this is Story Narae. Welcome to the mysterious and fantastic world of Oz. Starting today, I will be joining you on an amazing adventure with Dorothy and her friends. An ordinary girl, Dorothy, is suddenly swept away by a tornado and ends up in a completely different world, Oz. In order to return home from this strange place, Dorothy embarks on a perilous journey. Will Dorothy be able to return home safely? And what mysterious friends will she meet in Oz? The exciting story begins now.
Introduction. Folk tales, legends, myths, and fairy tales have accompanied childhood through all ages, as all children have a healthy, instinctive love for the fantastic, the wonderful, and the downright unrealistic. The winged fairies in the tales of the brothers. Grimm and Anderson bring more happiness to the hearts of children than any other human creation. But fairy tales from long ago have been passed down through generations and are now classified as history in children's libraries. It was also an era in which the stereotypical spirits, dwarves and fairies, were eliminated by authors who sought to create morality through fear. And a new wonderful tale emerged, full of terrifying and creepy events. Modern education is trying to teach a lesson, so modern children find only entertainment in these amazing stories and gladly omit the unpleasant events. Based on this idea, the story of the wonderful Wizard of Oz was written solely for the enjoyment of today's children. Through this, we aspire to continue the modern fairy tale, where wonder and joy continue and pain and nightmares disappear. Earl, Frank Baum, April 1900, Chicago.
Chapter 1, Whirlwind. Dorothy lived on the Great Plains of central Kansas with her Uncle Henry, a farmer, and his Aunt Em, the farmer's wife. Their house was small, built of lumber that had been transported miles by wagon. 4 walls, a floor, and a roof make up one room. The room contained a rusty cooking stove, a shelf with dishes on it, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em occupied the large bed in one corner, and Dorothy occupied the small bed in the other corner. There were no attics or basements, just a small hole in the floor that the family used as a shelter. When a great tornado came that would destroy every building in its path, all you had to do was open a small door in the floor and go down a ladder into a small dark hole. Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, but saw nothing but a vast plain of grey in all directions. The sky and the ground stretched out wide and long in all directions, and there was not a single tree or house to break this scenery. The sun was baking the fields with its grey weight. The sun burned the tips of the long blades of grass, until everything in sight was the same shade of grey, so that even the grass was not green. The house had been painted once, but the sun had made the paint fade. The rain had washed it away, so the house was now just a gloomy grey colour. When Mrs. M came to live here, she was a young and pretty wife, but the sun and wind changed her too. He took her sparkling eyes away and left them a dull grey. And he also changed the redness of her cheeks and lips to grey. She was very gaunt and had never smiled before. When Dorothy, an orphan, first came to visit, Aunt Em was very surprised by the child's laughter. So whenever Dorothy's cheerful voice reached her ears, she would scream in surprise, put her hand on her heart, and keep looking at the little girl, hoping that she would burst out laughing more. Uncle Henry didn't laugh either. I worked hard from morning to night and never knew any joy. He too was grey, from his long beard to his worn-out boots. He was strict and solemn and spoke little. It was Toto who made Dorothy smile and kept her from turning grey like everything around her. Toto wasn't grey. Toto has long silver fur and he's funny little. It was a small black puppy with small black eyes that twinkled brightly next to its nose. Dorothy loved Toto very much because Toto played with her all day long. But today, they couldn't play together. Uncle Henry sat by the door, looking anxiously at the sky, which was grayer than usual. Dorothy also stood at the doorway, holding Toto in her arms, and looked up at the sky together. Mrs. M was doing the dishes. With the low murmur of the wind coming from the far north, Uncle Henry and Dorothy saw the grass bend low and ripple. A wind blew with a sharp whistle from the south, and when they turned their eyes in that direction, they could see the grass waving in that direction too. Suddenly, Uncle Henry stood up.
And there's a tornado coming. I'll go check on the cattle for a bit.
Then I ran straight to the barn, where the cows and horses were. Mrs. M stopped what she was doing and came out to the door. She knew at a glance that danger was imminent. She shouted,
"Quick, Dorothy, run to the basement!"
Then Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and Dorothy chased after him. A very surprised Mrs. M opened the door in the floor and climbed down the ladder into a small dark hole. Dorothy soon caught Toto and started following the woman. As Dorothy was halfway across the room, she heard a loud scream of wind, and the house shook so violently that she tripped and fell to the floor. Then something strange happened. The house spun around 2 or 3 times and then slowly began to rise into the air. Dorothy felt like she was going up in a balloon. The winds blowing from the north and south met where the house stood, creating the exact center of the whirlwind. The center of the whirlwind was calm, but the tremendous pressure of the winds coming from all directions caused the house to rise higher and higher toward the top of the whirlwind. Dorothy's house stayed at the top of the whirlwind and flew farther and farther away like a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled terribly around her. But Dorothy knew she was holding up pretty well. After a few initial turns and a few more rocking, Dorothy felt herself being gently rocked like a baby in a cradle. Toto didn't like it. He paced around the room, barking loudly. But Dorothy sat still on the floor and waited quietly to see what would happen. Toto got too close to the basement door and ended up falling. The little girl thought she had lost Toto, but soon saw one of Toto's ears poking out above the hole in the basement. The enormous air pressure lifted him up and kept him from falling. Dorothy crept towards the cellar hole, grabbed Toto by the ear, dragged him into the room, and closed the door in the floor to prevent any more incidents. As time went by, Dorothy slowly overcame her fears, but she felt very lonely, and the wind was screaming at her so loudly that it was deafening. At first, Dorothy thought that if the house fell back to the ground, she would be shattered too. But as time passed, and the terrible things stopped happening, Dorothy decided to stop worrying and just wait quietly to see what would happen next. Dorothy crawled across the shaky floor to her bed and lay down there, and Toto followed her and lay down next to her. The house shook and the wind howled, but Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell asleep. Chapter 2. Meeting the Munchkins. Dorothy awoke suddenly and dangerously shocked. If Dorothy hadn't been lying in her soft bed, it would have been very dangerous. The shock took Dorothy's breath away, and she wondered what had happened. Toto buried his cold little nose in Dorothy's face and whined in annoyance. Dorothy sat up and noticed that the house was no longer moving. It was no longer dark because of the bright sunlight streaming in through the window and filling the small room. Dorothy jumped out of bed and ran towards the open door with Toto at her heels. The little girl looked around, screaming in surprise. Her pupils grew bigger and bigger at the wonderful sight. The tornado landed Dorothy's house very gently, considering it was a tornado on a strangely beautiful piece of land. There were beautiful lawns and sturdy trees with abundant sweet fruit. There were very beautiful and wonderful flower gardens all around, and birds with rare and colourful feathers were singing and flying between the trees and bushes. A little way off, a small stream sparkled between green banks, whispering in a very pleasant voice to a little girl who had lived a long time in the dry grey plains. While standing there, looking intently at the unfamiliar but beautiful scenery, Dorothy noticed that strange-looking people she had never seen before were approaching her. They weren't as big as the adults Dorothy usually saw, but they weren't too small either. In fact, they looked about the same height as Dorothy, who was relatively tall for her age. But they looked older. They were 3 strangely dressed men and 1 woman. They wore peaked hats that rose about a foot above their heads and had little bells on the brims that made a pretty tinkling sound as they moved. The men's hats were blue, and the women wore white hats and white gowns with pleats hanging from their shoulders. The dress was sprinkled with tiny stars that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. The men wore blue clothes, the same color as their hats, and shiny blue boots. Dorothy thought the men were about the same age as Uncle Henry, and 2 of them had beards. But the little woman undoubtedly looked older. Her face was wrinkled, her hair was almost white, and she walked a little stiffly. As they approached the house, Dorothy was standing in the doorway. They stopped walking and whispered to each other as if they were afraid to come any closer. But the little old woman walked straight up to Dorothy, bowed politely, and said in a sweet voice,
"Most noble wizard, welcome to the land of the Munchkins. We give you our sincere thanks for killing the Wicked Witch of the East and freeing us from our bondage."
Dorothy had a strange thought as she heard this. That little woman calling herself a sorceress and saying she killed the Wicked Witch of the East can't be serious, right? Dorothy was an innocent, harmless little girl who was carried miles from her home by a tornado, and she had never killed anything before. But the woman was clearly waiting for Dorothy's answer. So Dorothy said hesitantly,
"Thank you for your kindness, but I think there is some misunderstanding."
"I didn't kill anything," the little woman replied with a smile.
"Your house was like that, but it's the same anyway. Look,"
she continued, pointing to a corner of the house.
"There, under the wooden pillar, are 2 feet of an evil witch sticking out."
Dorothy was startled when she saw it and let out a small scream. There, indeed, 2 feet in pointed silver shoes were sticking out from under a large pillar at the corner of the house.
"Oh my,"
cried Dorothy, clasping her hands together in confusion.
"It looks like the house fell on her. What should we do?"
"You don't have to do anything,"
the little woman said quietly. Dorothy asked,
"But who is she?"
The little woman answered,
"She is the Wicked Witch of the East. As I said, she has been enslaving all the Munchkins for a long time and making them work day and night as slaves. Now they are all free, so thank you for what you did."
Dorothy asked,
"Who is Munchkin?"
"They are the people who live in the land of the East."
"Where the evil witch rules. Are you a Munchkin too?"
"No, I am their friend, and although I live in the lands of the North, the Munchkins sent me a quick messenger when they saw the death of the Witch of the East, and I came immediately. I am the Witch of the North."
Dorothy shouted.
"Oh, my goodness, are you really a witch?"
The little woman replied,
"Yes, that's true. But I'm a good witch and people like me. I'm not as strong as the evil witch who rules here. If that were the case, I would have set these people free."
But Dorothy said, half afraid that she was facing a real witch,
"But I thought all witches were evil."
"Oh, no, that's a really big misunderstanding. There are only 4 witches in Oz. The 2 living in the south and the 2 living in the north are both good witches. This is true because I am one of them. The 2 witches living in the east and west are truly evil witches. But now that you've killed one of them, the only wicked witch in Oz is the Wicked Witch of the West."
Dorothy thought for a moment and then said,
"But Aunt Em told me that all the witches died a long time ago."
The little woman asked,
"Who is Auntie Em?"
"This is my aunt who lives in Kansas where I came from."
The North Witch seemed to think for a moment, lowering her head slightly and looking at the ground. And then he soon raised his head and said,
I don't know where Kansas is because I've never heard of it before. Is that a civilized place?
Yes, of course.
And Dorothy answered, "Oh."
Then I understand. I know that there are no witches, wizards, or magicians left in any civilized country. But as you can see, Oz is not at all civilized and is cut off from the rest of the world. So we still have witches and wizards.
Dorothy asked.
Who are the wizards?
The Great Wizard of Oz, the witch,
Answered in a whisper.
He is more powerful than all of us combined. He lives in Emerald City.
Dorothy wants to ask another question. The Munchkins, who had been standing quietly, suddenly shouted and pointed to the corner of the house where the evil witch was lying.
What is this?
The dead witch's legs were completely gone, leaving nothing but silver shoes. The dead witch's legs were completely gone, leaving nothing but silver shoes. The North Witch explained.
She is very old, so she dries out so quickly in the sun.
This is her last.
So now those silver shoes are yours. Put them on.
She reached out, picked up the shoes, shook them to shake off the dust and handed them to Dorothy. One of the Munchkins said,
The Witch of the East was very proud of her silver shoes. What magic is in these shoes? But we have no idea what it is.
Dorothy took the shoes into the house and placed them on the table. Then he returned to the Munchkins and said,
I really want to go back to my aunt and uncle. They must be worried about me. Can you help me find my way back?
Then the Munchkins and the witch looked at each other, then back at Dorothy, and shook their heads. One of them said,
Not far from here to the east is a huge desert, and no one who tried to cross it survived.
Another one said,
It's the same in the south. I've been there and seen it. The south is the land of the Quadlings.
Then the third man said,
I bet it's the same in the west. There live the Winkies, and the Wicked Witch of the West rules. If you try to pass by there, she will try to make you her slave.
The witch also said,
I live in the north, but there is a huge desert there that surrounds Oz. I'm really sorry, but I guess you'll have to live here with us.
After hearing everyone's words, Dorothy felt lonely among all these strangers and began to sob. Dorothy's tears made the kind-hearted Munchkins sad, so they immediately took out their handkerchiefs and started crying together. Then the little old woman took off her hat and waved it over the tip of her nose,
Counting in a solemn voice, 1, 2, 3.
Then the hat turned into a blackboard, and on it appeared large letters written in white chalk. Then the hat turned into a blackboard, and large letters written in white chalk appeared on it.
Sent Dorothy to the Emerald City.
The little old woman picked up the blackboard in front of her nose, read what was written on it and asked,
Is your name Dorothy?
Yes.
said Dorothy, lifting her face and wiping her tears.
You have to go to Emerald City. Maybe Oz will help you.
Dorothy asked,
Where's that city?
The city is located exactly in the center of the country and is ruled by Oz. He is, as I said before, a great wizard.
The girl asked worriedly.
Is he a good person?
He is a good wizard. I've never met him, so I can't tell you if he's a guy or not.
Dorothy asked,
How can I get there?
I have no choice but to walk. Passing through this country will be a long journey, sometimes joyful, but also dark and terrifying. But to protect you from danger, I will use all the magic I know.
Will you come with me?
pleaded the girl, who had begun to regard the little old woman as her only friend. She answered,
No, I can't do that, but I'll kiss you. No one would dare harm someone who has been kissed by the Witch of the North.
She came close to Dorothy and kissed her gently on the forehead, where her lips touched. A round, shiny mark was left, instantly recognizable as Dorothy's. The witch said,
The road to Emerald City is paved in yellow, so you won't get lost. When you go to Oz, don't be afraid, tell him your story and ask him for help.
Goodbye, miss.
The three Munchkins wished Dorothy a pleasant journey, bowed politely, and went away through the trees. The witch nodded in a warm and friendly greeting, then turned 3 times on her left heel, and suddenly disappeared. Toto, who had only growled in fear while the witch was around, was so surprised after she disappeared that he barked loudly for a long time. But Dorothy, who knew she was a witch, was not particularly surprised because she had expected her to disappear so suddenly. Chapter 3. How did Dorothy save the Scarecrow? When Dorothy was left alone, she began to feel hungry. So she went into the kitchen, cut off some bread, spread some butter on it, and ate it, and gave some to Toto too. Then he took a bucket from the shelf, took it to a small stream, and filled it with sparkling clear water. Toto ran to where the trees were and barked at the branches where the birds were sitting. Dorothy went to pick up Toto and saw some really delicious-looking berries hanging from a tree branch. So she thought it would be nice to pick some and eat them for breakfast. Dorothy returned home and enjoyed a refreshing drink of cool, clean water with Toto, then prepared to set off on her journey to the Emerald City. Dorothy had only one spare set of clothes, which happened to be washed and hanging on a nail next to her bed. The dress was a gingham dress with a white and blue check pattern. It had been washed several times, so the blue had faded a little, but it was still a pretty dress. Dorothy washed herself carefully, put on a clean gingham dress, and put a wide-brimmed pink hat on her head. He carried a small basket filled with bread and covered with a white cloth. Afterwards, he looked down at his feet and realized how worn and old his shoes were, and he became nervous. Dorothy said,
"These shoes will definitely not last a long trip, Toto."
Toto looked up at Dorothy with his small dark eyes and wagged his tail as if he knew what she meant. At that very moment, Dorothy saw the silver shoes that had belonged to the Wicked Witch of the East lying on the table. Dorothy said to Toto,
"I wonder if those shoes will fit my feet. Those shoes will be fine even if I walk for a long time without wearing them out."
Dorothy took off her old leather shoes and tried on silver ones. It fit her feet perfectly, as if it were made for Dorothy. Dorothy got up with her basket.
"Follow me, Toto. We must go to the Emerald City and ask the Great Oz how to get back to Kansas."
Dorothy closed and locked the door, then carefully placed the key in her dress pocket. And then she started her journey with Toto, following behind her at a brisk pace. There were a few paths nearby, but it didn't take long before I found a yellow brick road. In a moment, Dorothy was walking briskly toward the Emerald City, her silver shoes clicking joyfully on the yellow pavement. The sun was shining brightly, and the birds were singing beautifully. So Dorothy didn't feel as bad as you might think. A little girl who was suddenly thrown into a strange land far from where she lived would feel. As Dorothy walked, she was amazed at how beautiful the scenery around her was. Next to the road was a neat fence, painted a lovely shade of blue, and behind it were fields full of grain and vegetables. It was clear that the Munchkins were excellent farmers. After a while, Dorothy passed by a house, and the people living there came out to see her and greeted her politely. It seemed like everyone knew that Dorothy had killed the Wicked Witch and freed them from their bonds. The Munchkins' home was a strangely shaped house, round in shape and covered with a large dome. In this eastern country, all the houses were painted blue, as if blue was the favorite color. Towards evening, Dorothy, tired from her long walk, began to wonder where to spend the night. She went to a house that was bigger than the others. Many men and women were dancing on the green grass in front of the house. 5 musicians were playing very loudly. People were laughing and singing, and a large table next to them was filled with delicious fruits, pies, cakes, and other delicious things. The people greeted Dorothy warmly, invited her to dinner, and asked her to stay the night with them. This was the home of one of the wealthiest of the Munchkins, and his friends were gathered together to celebrate their freedom from the bonds of the evil witch. Dorothy ate her dinner to her heart's content, served by a rich Munchkin named Bok. After dinner, I sat in an armchair and watched people dance. Bok looked at her silver shoes and said,
"You are clearly a great wizard."
And said,
"Why do you think so?"
asked Dorothy.
Because you killed the wicked witch and are wearing her silver shoes and you are wearing a white dress. And besides, you're wearing a white dress. Only witches and wizards wear white.
Then Dorothy said, smoothing out the wrinkles in her dress.
My dress is a blue and white,
said Bock.
Thank you so much for wearing it like that. Blue is the color of the Munchkins, and white is the color of the witch. So we knew you were a friendly witch to us.
Dorothy didn't know what to say about everyone thinking she was a witch, because she knew all too well that she was just an ordinary little girl who had the chance to come to a strange land by a whirlwind. When Dorothy got tired, Bock took her into the house and gave her a room with a pretty bed. Dorothy slept soundly until morning in a bed made of blue cloth. Toto also curled up on the blue carpet next to her and fell asleep. After a hearty breakfast, Dorothy was delighted to see the tiny Munchkin baby playing with Toto, pulling at his tail, screaming and laughing loudly. Toto was a great curiosity to everyone here who had never seen a dog before. Dorothy asked, "How far is the Emerald City from here?" Bark asked seriously.
I don't know much about it because I've never been there. If you don't have anything to do with Oz, it's better to stay away from Oz as much as possible. But the road to the Emerald City is quite a long one, taking several days. This country is rich and fun, but you will have to go through difficult and dangerous places to reach your destination.
Dorothy was a little worried at this, but she was determined not to turn back, knowing that only the Great Oz could help her get back to Kansas. She said goodbye to her friends and started walking down the yellow brick road again. After walking a few miles, Dorothy decided to take a break. Then he climbed up on the fence by the side of the road and sat down. Behind the fence was a very large cornfield, and not far away I saw a scarecrow hanging high on a pole to protect the ripening corn from birds. Dorothy sat with her chin on her hand and looked at the scarecrow carefully. The scarecrow's head was made by filling a small sack with rags and drawing eyes, a nose, and a mouth to make a face. An old pointed blue hat, probably belonging to some munchkin, sat on his head. He was also wearing an old faded blue suit with rags stuffed inside. On his feet he was wearing old blue boots, like everyone else here. A pole was stuck in his back, so his entire body was raised higher than the cornstalks. Dorothy was staring intently at the grotesquely drawn face of a scarecrow when one of the scarecrow's eyes slowly winked at her. At first, Dorothy thought she was mistaken, because scarecrows in Kansas never wink. But soon the scarecrow nodded and greeted her. Dorothy immediately jumped down from the fence and walked over to it, while Toto circled around the pole and barked.
"Hello,"
in a slightly hoarse voice.
Can you tell?
The scarecrow answered.
"Of course, nice to meet you."
Dorothy replied politely.
I'm glad to see you too,
said the scarecrow with a smile.
"It's really boring standing here day and night trying to scare the birds away."
Dorothy asked.
Can't you get down from there?
"I can't get down because this pole is stuck in my back. I would really appreciate it if you could help me get off this pole."
Dorothy stretched out her arms and lifted it off the pole. It was very light, probably because it was filled with rags. The scarecrow spoke as it was placed on the ground.
"Thank you so much. I feel like a new person."
Dorothy was puzzled by the situation where the ragman was talking, greeting, and standing next to her. The scarecrow stretched and yawned, asking,
"Who are you? Where are you going?"
My name is Dorothy, and I am going to the Emerald City to ask the Great Oz to send me back to Kansas.
He asked.
"Where is the Emerald City? And who is Oz?"
asked Dorothy in surprise.
No, you don't know.
He answered in a sad voice.
"Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know anything. As you can see, I'm full of rags."
And I don't have a brain at all.
The scarecrow asked.
"If I go to the Emerald City with you?"
Dorothy answered.
I don't know, but if you like, you can come with me. Even if Oz didn't give you a brain, you wouldn't be any worse off than you are now.
"Yes, that's true,"
he said, his voice lowering.
"I don't really care if my body, arms and legs are filled with rags. Because I don't get hurt. If someone steps on my toe or pricks me with a pin, it doesn't matter because I don't feel it. But I hate it when people call me stupid. How could I not know that if I had a brain like you instead of a rag in my head?
The girl said to him, feeling very sorry.
I know how you feel. If you come with me, I will ask Oz to do everything he can for you.
Thank you.
They turned back to the road. Dorothy helped the Scarecrow get over the fence. They started walking together down the yellow brick road towards the Emerald City. Toto didn't like this new companion at first. Toto circled the Scarecrow, sniffing around as if he were looking for a mouse's nest hidden in the rags, and occasionally growling coldly. Dorothy said to her new friend.
Don't worry about Toto. He never bites.
The Scarecrow replied.
I don't care. That dog can't hurt me. I'm made of rags. I'll carry that basket. Don't worry, I won't get tired. I'll tell you a secret.
He continued talking as he walked.
There is only one thing in the world.
Dorothy asked.
What is that? Is that the Munchkin farmer who created you?
The Scarecrow answered.
No, that's a lit match.
Chapter 4. The Path Through the Forest. After a few hours, the road started to get rough, and walking became more and more difficult. Because the path was uneven, the Scarecrow often stumbled over protruding rocks. Sometimes there were holes where the bricks were broken or missing entirely, and Toto jumped over them, while Dorothy turned sideways and walked. But maybe because he had no brain, the Scarecrow always walked straight and straight, so his foot fell into the hole, and he fell down on the road like a big sledgehammer. But the Scarecrow wasn't hurt. When Dorothy helped him up and helped him stand again, the Scarecrow started walking again, laughing happily about his little mishap. The surrounding fields were much more barren than they had been. There were far fewer houses and trees there, and the further we went, the drier and more desolate the landscape became. About noon they sat down on the roadside, overlooking a small stream. Dorothy took some bread out of the basket. She offered the Scarecrow a piece of bread, but he declined.
I'm never hungry, my mouth is just drawn. So that's a good thing. If I put a hole in my mouth and try to eat something, the rags inside me will try to come out. Then my face shape will be ruined.
Dorothy nodded in agreement and began eating her bread. When Dorothy had finished eating, the Scarecrow said,
Tell me about yourself and the place you lived.
So she told him about Kansas, and how everything was gray there, and how a whirlwind had brought her to this wonderful land of Oz. The Scarecrow listened carefully, and then said,
I don't understand why you would leave this beautiful place and go back to that dry, gray place.
The girl answered,
That's because you don't have a brain. It doesn't matter if our hometown is gloomy and gray. The body and blood of our people should live in our hometown more than anywhere else. Even though this place is really beautiful, it can't be like our home.
The Scarecrow said with a sigh.
Of course I can't understand that. If your head was full of rags like mine, you'd probably live your whole life in this beautiful place, and then Kansas would be empty.
The boy asked,
Wouldn't you like to tell me your story while we rest?
Then the Scarecrow looked at Dorothy with an accusing expression, and said,
Actually, my life is so short that I have nothing to tell you. I was just created the day before yesterday. I have no idea what happened in the world before that. Luckily, the farmer drew one ear first when he made my head, so I could hear what was going on. There was another Munchkin there with the farmer. The first thing I heard was the farmer saying, How about these ears? Someone else said, You didn't draw it straight. The farmer said, It's okay, as long as it looks like an ear, that's enough. The farmer said, Now I have to draw the eyes. As soon as he drew my right eye, I looked around at the farmer and everything around me with curious eyes. Because it was the first time in my life that I saw the world. Said another person who was watching the farmer. Your eyes are pretty, said the farmer. Blue paint is a good eye color. I'm thinking of making the other eye a little bigger. When the second eye was finished, I could see much better than before. And the farmer also drew my nose and mouth. But at that time I didn't know what I could do with my mouth, so I couldn't say anything. I had fun watching them build my torso, arms and legs. Finally they fixed my head to the torso. At that time, I was very proud because I thought I was a great person like everyone else. The farmer said, "This guy will be really good at chasing birds. He looks just like a person." "What are you talking about? This guy is really human," said another man, and I thought he was right. The farmer carried me in his arms into the cornfield and set me up on the long pole where you found me. The farmer and his friend soon left me alone. I didn't like the way they left me behind, so I tried to move my feet to follow them. But my feet didn't touch the ground, and I had no choice but to stay on the pole. It was such a lonely life that I didn't even want to think about it, because it had just been created. So there was nothing to think about. Manhun kamagwidolgwa dalian sa duli ogzasabate wasde ganal bojamaja mian chicken nongbulo sengahesnunji miali domongasji. That was kind of fun. And it made me feel very important. But soon an old crow came closer, looked at me closely, sat on my shoulder and said, "To think that you could fool me in such a clumsy way? Any crow with even a little bit of sense would know that you are just filled with rags." Then the crow jumped down to my feet and ate as much corn as he wanted. When the other birds saw that I could not harm him, they also flocked to eat the corn. So in a short while, I was surrounded by birds. I was very sad, because I ended up showing that I was not good enough to be a scarecrow. But the old crow consoled me and said, "If you had only a brain in your head, you would have been a great person like everyone else. Maybe even better than them. The brain is the only valuable thing in this world. It doesn't matter whether it's a crow or a human." I kept thinking about this after the crow left. And then I decided that I had to work hard to get a brain. Then, fortunately, you came and pulled me down from the pole. And I listened to you and became convinced that if we went to the Emerald City, the Great Oz would give me brains.
Dorothy said sincerely.
I hope so. Because you want it so badly.
The Scarecrow answered.
Oh, yes, I really want one. It's so bad to know you're a fool.
Well, let's go then,
said Dorothy, handing the basket to the Scarecrow. There were no fences on either side of the road anymore, and the surrounding land was rough and uncultivated. Towards evening they reached a dense forest. Very large trees were growing densely, their branches intertwined and covering the yellow brick road. The forest was as dark as midnight, with the tree branches blocking out the sunlight. But these travelers did not stop walking and entered the forest. The Scarecrow said,
"If there is a way in, there must be a way out." Dorothy said that if you follow this road,
there will be an Emerald City at the end of the road.
Anyone knows that,
the Scarecrow answered.
Of course, that's why I know. If it took a brain to figure that out, I would never have said that.
After about an hour, the sunlight had completely disappeared, and they were left staggering about in the darkness. Dorothy couldn't see at all, but Toto, like most dogs, could see very well in the dark. The Scarecrow said he still sees as well as day, so Dorothy could barely walk holding onto the Scarecrow's arm.
If you see a house or a place where we can spend the night, please tell me. It's really hard to walk in the dark.
After a while, the Scarecrow stopped.
We saw a little cabin to our right. It's made of logs and branches. Should we go there?
Yeah, I'm really tired.
So the Scarecrow led Dorothy through the thick trees until they reached the cabin. Upon entering the house, Dorothy found a bed of dry leaves in one corner. She immediately fell into bed and fell into a deep sleep with Toto. But the Scarecrow, who never tires, stands in another corner and quietly waits for the morning to come. Chapter 5, Saving the Tin Woodman. When Dorothy woke up, the sun was shining through the trees, and Toto had been out for a long time, chasing birds and squirrels. Dorothy sat up and looked around. The Scarecrow stood there quietly, waiting for her. Dorothy said to him.
I have to go out and find some water,
asked the Scarecrow.
Why do you need water?
I need it to wash my dirty face, and I also need to drink it so that I won't choke on the hard bread. And I also need to drink it so that I won't choke on the hard bread.
The Scarecrow thought deeply, and then said,
It's really uncomfortable to live as a human being. You have to sleep, eat, and drink. But you have a brain, so that's worth more than a lot of other inconveniences.
They left the cabin and walked through the trees until they found a spring of clear water. There, Dorothy drank water, washed her face, and ate breakfast. She noticed that there was not much bread left in her basket. So I was really thankful that the Scarecrow didn't eat anything, because there wasn't enough bread for Dorothy and Toto to eat for the day. As Dorothy finished her meal and was about to turn back towards the yellow brick road, she heard a deep groaning sound somewhere nearby. Dorothy asked in fear.
What does that mean?
The Scarecrow answered.
I can't imagine it, but if you go and see it, you'll know.
Just then, they heard another groan, which seemed to come from behind them. As they turned and walked a few steps into the forest, Dorothy noticed something shining in the sunlight streaming through the trees. She ran towards it, then suddenly stopped and screamed in surprise. A huge tree was half cut down, and next to it stood a man made entirely of tin, holding an axe in his hand. His head, arms, and legs were all connected to his torso, and he stood motionless, as if he could not move at all. Dorothy looked at it with eyes full of wonder, and so did the Scarecrow. But Toto barked so fiercely that he bit the tin leg, but it only hurt his teeth. Dorothy asked,
Did you moan?
The Tin Man answered,
Yeah, I did. I've been moaning for over a year, but no one has heard me or come to my aid.
How can I help you?
Dorothy asked kindly, moved by the man's sad voice. He answered,
Get a can of oil and grease my joints. They are so rusted I can't move at all. Once you grease it, I'll be able to move again in no time. You can find the oil can on the shelf in my cabin.
Dorothy ran straight to the cabin, found the oil can, and came back. Then she asked, anxiously,
Where can I oil it?
The Tin Woodman answered,
First, oil my neck.
So Dorothy put oil there, but it was so badly rusted that the Scarecrow had to hold the Tin Woodman's head and turn it from side to side until it moved smoothly. And only then could the Tin Woodman move his head on his own.
Now put oil on my arm.
Dorothy oiled both arms, and the Scarecrow carefully bent and straightened his arms until they moved as well as new. The Tin Woodman sighed in satisfaction, then lowered the axe he had been holding and leaned it against the tree. He said,
Oh, now I really feel like I can live. I've been holding that axe in the air ever since it started to rust. I can't tell you how happy I am to finally be able to put the axe down. Now just oil my legs and I'll be fine again.
So they oiled the Tin Woodman's legs, and soon he was able to move freely. He kept repeating his thanks for helping him. The Tin Woodman was a very polite and grateful man.
If you guys hadn't come, I would have had to stand here forever. You guys really saved my life. But how did you come here?
Dorothy answered,
We are on our way to the Emerald City to meet the Great Oz, and we have come to your cottage to spend the night.
He asked,
Why do you want to meet Oz?
Said Dorothy.
I'll ask Oz to send me back to Kansas, and I'll ask the Scarecrow to put a brain in his head.
The Tin Woodman seemed to think it over for a moment, and then he said,
Can Oz give me a heart?
Dorothy answered,
Of course I could. I think it would be as easy as giving brains to a scarecrow.
Answered the Tin Woodman.
Yeah, that's right. If I could go with you, I would go to the Emerald City and ask Oz for help.
Then, let's go together,
said the Scarecrow happily. Dorothy added that she would really like it if he went with her. So the Tin Woodman shouldered his axe and followed him. They walked through the woods back to the yellow brick road. The Tin Woodman asked Dorothy to put a can of oil in his basket.
If it gets exposed to rain, It might rust again. Then you will definitely need an oil can.
It was really lucky to have a new friend with them, because as soon as they started to travel again, they reached a place where the trees were so thick and the branches covered the road that it was impossible to pass. But the Tin Woodman began to cut down the trees with his axe, and in no time he made a path large enough for everyone to pass through together. Dorothy was so lost in thought as she walked that she didn't notice the Scarecrow stumble into a hole and roll over onto the side of the road. The Scarecrow had to call out loud to Dorothy to help him stand up. The Tin Woodman asked,
"Why don't you go around the hole?"
The Scarecrow answered cheerfully,
"I didn't really know. As you know, my head is filled with rags. That's why I'm going to Oz and asking for brains,"
said the Tin Woodman.
"Oh, I see. But the brain isn't the most precious thing in the world,"
asked the Scarecrow.
"Then you have a brain?"
asked the Tin Woodman.
"No, my head is completely empty. But once upon a time I had a brain along with a heart. If I had to choose between the two, I would rather have a heart."
The Scarecrow asked,
"Why do you think so?"
"I'll tell you my story, and you'll know why."
So as they walked through the forest, the Tin Woodman told them this story.
"I was born the son of a lumberjack who made a living by cutting down trees in the forest and selling them. When I grew up, I became a lumberjack too. After my father passed away, I lived taking care of my old mother. After my mother passed away and I was left to live alone, I decided to get married. Then you won't be lonely. There was a very beautiful Munchkin girl, and I soon fell in love with her with all my heart. She promised to marry me if I could save enough money to build a better house for her, so I worked harder than before. But the girl lived with her old mother, who did not want her daughter to marry anyone. The old woman was very lazy, so she wanted the girl to stay with her and cook and do housework. So the old woman went to the Wicked Witch of the East and promised her 2 sheep and a cow if she would stop this marriage. Then immediately the evil witch put a spell on my axe. One sunny day, I went to cut down a tree with the desire to get a new house and wife as soon as possible, and the axe suddenly slipped and cut off my left leg. At first I thought this was a great misfortune, because I couldn't work as a woodcutter with only one leg. Guliseo nan dejengjengalo shajagaseo guj yangcholo se dalaleul mandelio dalago haseo. Once I got used to it, the tin bridge worked very well. But my actions angered the Wicked Witch of the East, who promised the old woman that she would make sure I would not marry the beautiful Munchkin girl. As I started chopping wood again, the axe slipped again and cut off my right leg. I went back to the blacksmith and he made me a bridge out of tin. After that, the enchanted axe cut off my arms one by one. But I didn't give up and turned them all into tin. Then the evil witch made an axe cut off my head. At that time I thought it was all over. But then a blacksmith happened to be passing by and he made me a new head out of tin. So I thought I had defeated the evil witch and worked harder than before. But I had no idea how cruel my enemy was. The witch has come up with a new way to destroy my love for the beautiful Munchkin girl. The axe slipped again and passed right through my body, splitting me in two. The blacksmith came back to help me again and made a body out of tin, and then screwed the tin arms, legs, and head together to make them solid. So I can get around just like before. But I don't have a heart now. So I lost all my love for that Munchkin girl. Now I don't care whether I marry her or not. But I think that girl is still living with the old woman, waiting for me to come to her. I am very proud of my body that shines in the sunlight. Now, even if the axe slips, it won't hurt me, so it won't be a problem. The only thing I'm afraid of is my joints are going to rust. So I always keep a can of oil in the cabin and oil and service it whenever I need to. But one day, I forgot to oil the tree and went out to cut wood, and a storm came up. Before I could even think about it, my joints were rusted. And then I just stood in the forest until you guys came to help me. It was really horrible to live like that, but after standing there for almost a year, I had time to think, and I realized that my biggest loss was losing my heart. While I was in love, I was the happiest person in the world. But no one can love without a heart, so I decided to ask Oz for a heart. If he does that, I will go back to Munchkin Miss and marry her.
After listening to the Tin Woodman's story with great interest, Dorothy and the Scarecrow could understand why he wanted a new heart so much. The Scarecrow said,
But still, I would ask for a brain instead of a heart. Even if a fool had a heart, he wouldn't know what he could do with it.
The Tin Woodman replied,
I will have a heart, because I cannot be happy with just a brain. Happiness is the most precious thing in the world.
Dorothy said nothing because she couldn't tell which of her two friends was right. She thought it didn't matter if the woodcutter had no brains, or the Scarecrow had no heart, or if neither of them got what they wanted. As long as she could get back to Kansas and Aunt Em, what worried Dorothy the most was that there was almost no bread left. It seemed like if she and Toto had just one more meal, the basket would be empty. What was clear was that while the Woodman and the Scarecrow could do without eating anything, Dorothy could not survive without eating because she was not made of tin or rags. Chapter 6. The Cowardly Lion. Dorothy and her friends continued walking through the dense forest. The road was still paved with yellow bricks, but it was difficult to walk because of the dry branches and fallen leaves from the trees. There weren't many birds in this forest. This may be because birds prefer wide open fields with plenty of sunlight. But sometimes in the forest, the growling of beasts hidden among the trees could be heard. The little girl's heart pounded quickly, not knowing what kind of beast was crying. But Toto seemed to know. Toto walked close to Dorothy and did not bark in response. Dorothy asked the Tin Woodman,
How much longer do I have to go before I can leave this forest?
The woodcutter answered,
I've never been to Emerald City, so I don't know. My father had been there when I was young, and he said that the closer you get to the city where Oz lives, the more beautiful the scenery becomes. But it is a long journey that requires passing through dangerous places to get there. But as long as I have my oil can, I have nothing to fear. And no one will harm the Scarecrow, and you have the good witch's kiss on your forehead, so that will protect you from harm.
The girl said worriedly.
But Toto, who will protect him?
Answered the Tin Woodman.
If Toto is in danger, we have to protect him.
As soon as he finished, a terrible roar was heard from the forest. Immediately, a large lion suddenly ran into the road. With one kick from the lion, the Scarecrow spun around and flew to the side of the road. Then the lion struck the Tin Woodman with his sharp claws. But the lion was surprised to see that the woodcutter had only fallen on the road and was not injured. Just then, when the enemy appeared before his eyes, little Toto ran towards the lion and barked. When the great beast opened its mouth to bite Toto, Dorothy risked her life by jumping between them, thinking that Toto might die. Then he struck the lion's nose as hard as he could and shouted,
Don't bite Toto. It's shameful for a big beast like you to bite such a small, poor puppy.
I didn't bite.
The lion answered, rubbing Dorothy's nose with his forepaw. Then Dorothy snapped.
I know, but you were going to bite me. You're just a big coward,
the lion said, shaking his head in shame.
I know, I always think that way. But how can I avoid being a coward?
I don't know, just think of the poor Scarecrow you hit.
A scarecrow?
Asked the lion, startled. Then he quietly watched Dorothy lift the Scarecrow, gently patting and straightening it, trying to bring it back to the way it was.
Yes, it's made of rags,
Dorothy replied, still looking angry. The lion muttered,
That's why you fell so easily. I was really surprised to see him fly like that. Then is that guy over there also made of rags?
Said Dorothy, helping the Tin Woodman to his feet.
No, he's made of tin,
said the lion.
so my toenail almost broke off. And it sent goosebumps down my back when it scraped the tin. What is that little beast you love so much?
Dorothy answered.
He asked my dog Totoya.
The lion asked.
Is that puppy made of tin or rags too?
Said Dorothy.
Neither of them. He's a real fleshy puppy.
Oh, what a strange looking animal. Now that I look at it, it's really small.
The lion said in a sad voice.
No one would think of eating such a small animal except a coward like me.
Why did you become such a coward?
Dorothy looked at this huge beast, about the size of a small horse, with astonishment and asked. The lion answered.
That's the riddle. Maybe it's been that way since I was born. All the other animals in the forest assume I'm brave, because the lion is the king of beasts everywhere. I found that when I growl really loudly, all living animals get scared and run away from me. Every time I met someone I was scared to death, but whenever I growled, that person would always run away. If an elephant, a tiger or a bear tried to fight me, I would run away. I'm such a coward, but as soon as they hear me growl, they all run away from me. Then of course I just let it go,
said the Scarecrow.
But that is not right. The king of beasts cannot be a coward.
The lion replied, wiping the tears that had filled his eyes with his tail.
I know that too. That is the greatest sorrow that makes my life very miserable. But when danger comes, my heart trembles so hard,
said the Tin Woodman.
Maybe it was a heart attack.
Maybe,
said the lion. The Tin Woodman continued to speak.
If you have heart disease, you should be happy, because it's proof that you have a heart. I don't have a heart, so I can't have a heart disease,
the lion said with a serious expression.
Perhaps I wouldn't have been a coward if I didn't have a heart,
the Scarecrow asked.
Do you have a brain?
The lion answered.
Maybe so. I've never seen it before.
But then the Scarecrow spoke up.
I am going to the Great Oz to ask for a brain, because my head is filled with rags,
said the woodcutter.
I will ask for a heart,
Dorothy added.
I will ask Oz to let me go back to Kansas with Toto.
Can Oz give me courage too?
The Cowardly Lion asked. The Scarecrow said,
If he could give me a brain, I could.
If you will give me your heart,
said the Tin Woodman.
If you can send me back to Kansas,
said Dorothy. The lion said,
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to go with you.
Dorothy answered.
Then we welcome you, because it can keep other ferocious beasts from approaching us. I think those beasts that are so scared of you are much more cowardly than you.
The lion said.
That's true, really, but that doesn't make me braver. I won't be happy as long as I know I'm a coward.
So these guys set off on their journey again. The lion strode majestically beside Dorothy. Toto was initially reluctant to welcome his new friend, as he could not forget the incident where he almost died between the lion's huge jaws. But as time passed, he gradually became more at ease. And now Toto and the Cowardly Lion were best friends. For the rest of the day, nothing disturbed the peace of this trip. No, actually, there was one thing. The Tin Woodman killed a bug that was crawling on the road. This incident made the Tin Woodman very sad, as he had always been careful not to harm any living being. He shed tears of sorrow and regret as he walked. These tears flowed slowly down his face and into the joints between his jaws, rusting them. Dorothy suddenly asked the Tin Woodman a question, but his jaw was so stiff that he could not open his mouth. Then the frightened woodcutter made various gestures to Dorothy to get her to help him, but she did not understand. The lion was also confused as to what was wrong. But the Scarecrow immediately took a can of oil from Dorothy's basket and put oil on the woodman's chin. Then, after a while, the woodcutter was able to speak again. The Tin Woodman said,
I learned a lesson from this. From now on, I have to watch where I step carefully. If I kill another bug, I'll definitely start crying again, and my jaw will rust and I won't be able to speak.
From then on, he walked very carefully, scanning the ground. When he saw an ant crawling, he jumped with wide steps to avoid hurting the ant. The Tin Woodman knew very well that he had no heart, so he was always careful not to be rude or cruel to anyone. The Tin Woodman said,
You who have a heart will not do wrong because you have something to guide you. But I have to be very careful because I don't have a heart. Of course, if Oz gives me a heart, I won't have to be so careful from then on.
Dorothy meets new friends and takes the first steps on a long and special journey. But the real adventure starts now. What trials will they face to achieve their wish? Continued in part 2 of The Wizard of Oz. If you feel warm, please subscribe and like to join us for the next story. The story will continue. Come and journey with us through Story Narae.